It was a quiet day on Earth. The skies were clear, and the usual hustle of life went on as if nothing extraordinary was about to happen. People went about their daily routines, some were at work, others were at school, and some were simply enjoying the peace of the moment. No one knew that, far above, in the cold darkness of space, the first chapter of a new story was beginning, one that would forever change Earth. High above the Earth's atmosphere, hidden from the view of any normal human, something enormous was approaching. It wasn't just another ship, it was something beyond anything anyone had ever seen. It was the Dreadnought, a warship so massive that even the most powerful satellites on Earth couldn't see it until it was almost too late. The Dreadnought had been built in secret, a symbol of power. It was designed to be humanity's shield, a fortress in the stars capable of defending Earth from any threat, real or imagined. But no one expected it to be more than just a defense vessel, and that was about to change. At first, the government and military leaders weren't sure what to make of it. The Dreadnought was meant to be a silent protector, not a weapon of intimidation. But as the ship moved closer to Earth's orbit, the people in charge began to realize something disturbing. The ship wasn't just huge, it was alive, almost as if it had its own presence, its own purpose that extended beyond mere defense. Inside the ship, the crew worked in perfect harmony. They were the best humanity had to offer: engineers, pilots, soldiers, and strategists who had all been carefully chosen for this mission. Each one knew their place, and each one understood the importance of their role in this moment. They were ready for first contact, the most important event in the history of humankind. But no one was prepared for the sudden realization of what the ship represented. The captain of the ship, Captain Alden, stood in front of the massive command screen, his face lit up by the glow of distant stars. He was an experienced leader, but even he felt a cold weight in his chest as the ship crossed into alien space. For the first time in history, humanity's greatest weapon, the Dreadnought, was visible, and it was terrifying. "Initiating full systems check," said the ship's AI, its voice calm and neutral. Alden nodded, his hands gripping the edge of his command chair. The Dreadnought's engines hummed beneath him, a soft vibration that made the ship feel alive. It was a monster, true behemoth in space, built to strike fear into the hearts of any alien species that might challenge Earth. But fear, as Alden had learned in his years of service, was a double-edged sword. Fear could drive enemies away, but it could also spark a deadly reaction. As the Dreadnought neared the edge of Earth's atmosphere, Captain Alden couldn't help but wonder, had they gone too far? Had humanity built something so powerful that it would break the delicate balance of peace that they had fought so hard to establish? "Message from Earth," the AI said, breaking Alden's thoughts. The voice was sharp, urgent. It was a reminder that, despite everything, they were still connected to their home planet. "Send it through," Alden ordered. The screen flickered, and the face of the Earth's chief representative appeared. His face was calm, but there was a look of uncertainty in his eyes. "Captain, you're clear to proceed with the first contact mission," he said, his voice steady but with an underlying tension. "The Dreadnought is to be your symbol of peace. You will show the galaxy that Earth is not to be underestimated. But remember, peace is the ultimate goal. Do not provoke unnecessary conflict." Alden nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that peace was no longer the primary objective. The Dreadnought wasn't just a symbol, it was a weapon, and weapons had a way of changing everything. As the ship's massive form edged closer to the distant planet of Zora, an alien world that had been selected for the first contact, the crew remained silent. They knew what was at stake. This moment could define humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Outside, in the vast darkness of space, the Dreadnought glowed like a star, a beacon of power, the perfect tool for domination. Its massive structure seemed to float effortlessly, as if it had always belonged in the heavens. The quiet hum of its engines was the only sound that echoed through its hollow halls. The world below, oblivious to the impending change, went on with its business. But in space, everything was about to shift. The Dreadnought was no longer just a weapon, it was the beginning of something bigger. Something that would change humanity's future forever. The first alien ship, a sleek, mysterious vessel from the Zoran Council, approached Earth's atmosphere, prepared to meet the humans for the first time. But as it got closer to the Dreadnought, something happened, something unexpected. The Zoran ship stopped. There was a moment of absolute stillness, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The Dreadnought had already sent its message. Without saying a word, it had declared humanity's power. And now, as the Zoran ship hovered in front of it, the future of Earth and the galaxy would change forever. The silence in the command room was thick, almost suffocating. Captain Alden stood at the command center of the Dreadnought, his eyes fixed on the holographic display that flickered with static as it showed the incoming alien ship. The Zoran Council's vessel was coming closer, a sleek, angular thing that didn't seem built for war. It looked almost like a work of art, as if it had been designed not to destroy but to communicate. The humans, in contrast, were ready for battle. The Zoran ship edged closer. The tension aboard the Dreadnought grew. The crew of the Dreadnought, the finest of Earth's military forces, knew that this mission wasn't about alliances or peace. It was about sending a message, one that the galaxy would remember. They had no time for diplomacy or niceties. They had come to establish dominance. The Zoran ship, now within range, slowed down, and the glowing blue lights of its engines dimmed. The alien craft sent a signal, the language unintelligible but unmistakably clear, a greeting, an offer of communication. The Dreadnought systems automatically detected the message. But there was a long pause before Alden gave his orders. "Open the channel," Alden commanded. His voice was steady, but inside, there was a storm brewing. He didn't know what to expect from the aliens, but he had no illusions about humanity's intentions. The Dreadnought had been built to intimidate, to break through the shields of foreign threats with sheer force. If the Zorans were here for peace, they were about to find out that Earth had no interest in negotiating from a position of weakness. A few seconds later, the screen before Alden flashed to life, revealing the face of the Zoran envoy. The alien looked like something between a humanoid and an insect, tall and thin, with an elongated head and glittering black eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of space itself. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. "We come in peace," the Zoran envoy said. His words were simple, but there was an underlying tension that suggested they were more of a formality than an actual offer. The Dreadnought was the perfect symbol of human power, but it wasn't meant to be a diplomat's tool. It was a weapon, and every part of it spoke that language. Alden paused, considering the response. The Zorans didn't know the true purpose of the Dreadnought, or perhaps they hadn't realized it yet. They were still thinking of this encounter as a negotiation, a simple exchange between civilizations, but the truth was that they had stepped into humanity's world, and Earth had no plans of making it easy for them. "We know why you've come," Alden said, his voice cool, devoid of emotion. "But Earth has no interest in negotiation. We don't seek your approval. What we seek is respect, and that respect will be earned." The Zoran envoy's face didn't change, but Alden could sense a ripple of confusion, followed by a flicker of unease. The envoy was trying to process the implications of Alden's words, but it was clear that the Zorans hadn't expected such a response. They had hoped for peace, for an alliance. Instead, they were faced with a force they couldn't even begin to understand. "We did not come to fight," the envoy said, but there was a shift in his tone now, a slight tremor that betrayed his true feelings. "We came to learn, to open the door to a future of cooperation." Alden's eyes narrowed, and he glanced over to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Ramos, who stood by the communications panel. She gave him a quick nod, and Alden turned his attention back to the screen. "Cooperation." Alden's voice was cold now, cutting through the tension. "Your kind has been watching us from afar, analyzing us, studying us, waiting for the right moment to make contact. You think we don't know your games? You think we don't understand what you're really after?" The Zoran envoy opened his mouth to speak, but Alden continued, his words growing sharper with each passing second. "Humanity doesn't need your cooperation. What we need is your obedience." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto the envoy's face. "And that begins with understanding that the Dreadnought is not here for peace. It is here to show you that Earth is no longer a weak, vulnerable planet. We are not a species to be ignored." A sudden flicker of panic flashed in the envoy's eyes, but it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. He straightened up, his posture becoming more rigid, defensive. "You misunderstand us, Captain. We did not come here to conquer. We came here to test us," Alden interrupted. "You thought that we were just another small, defenseless planet in the galaxy, but you were wrong. We are humanity, and we've built the Dreadnought to make sure no one forgets that again." The message was clear now, not just for the Zorans, but for everyone who might be watching. The Dreadnought was humanity's answer to the galaxy, a challenge thrown into the face of anyone who thought Earth was a simple, powerless world. There was no turning back now. Alden turned to his crew, who were standing silently, waiting for his next command. "Prepare the ship for launch, full power to the engines." As the crew sprang into action, the Zoran envoy's face turned pale. It was evident that the peaceful negotiations they had hoped for were slipping away. replaced by the grim realization that Earth had no intention of playing by their rules. Captain, wait. We need to. The transmission was cut off before the envoy could finish. Alden turned to his crew, his expression hardening. The Dreadnought had made its statement. Now it was time to see if the galaxy was ready to respond. The quiet hum of the Dreadnought's engines was the only sound that filled the command room as Captain Alden stared out at the vastness of space. The Zoran envoy's transmission had ended abruptly, and with it, any chance for peaceful negotiations. The gravity of the situation began to settle in, but there was no turning back. Humanity had made its decision. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to dominate. Alden's hand rested on the edge of his command chair, the cold surface grounding him as the tension in the room thickened. His crew remained silent, all eyes focused on their respective stations, each person aware of the weight of the moment. This was the point of no return. The Dreadnought wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol, a statement to the galaxy that humanity would no longer cower in the shadows. The holographic map of the solar system flickered in front of Alden, showing the Zoran ship, still suspended in space, hesitant to make any further moves. Its engines were silent, and its lights had dimmed, as if the crew was contemplating what had just transpired. But the Zorans were slow to realize one simple fact: no one had ever dealt with Earth this way before. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would learn just how dangerous that mistake could be. Captain, we've received another transmission from the Zoran ship, Lieutenant Ramos said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but Alden could hear the hint of apprehension in it. She wasn't afraid. No one aboard the Dreadnought was afraid, but the unknown always carried a certain weight. Alden didn't answer immediately. He was still thinking about the Dreadnought's role in all of this, a vessel of peace. Hardly. It was an instrument of control, a weapon that could erase entire civilizations with a single command. And that command, he realized, was within his reach. Humanity had built it, and now they would use it to ensure that no one ever again questioned their place in the galaxy. Patch it through, Alden said, his voice sharp. The screen flickered to life, and the Zoran envoy's face appeared once more. This time, however, it was different. His eyes were wide, his face pale, as if he had just woken up from a nightmare. There was no sign of confidence or calmness in his expression. The peaceful demeanor that had been present in his earlier transmission was gone, replaced by the growing realization that he was no longer in control of the situation. Captain Alden, the envoy began, his voice trembling slightly. You've misunderstood us. We did not come here to challenge Earth. We came to learn, to understand. Alden didn't flinch. The envoy's words were nothing more than an attempt to salvage a situation that was already lost. The Dreadnought had made its presence known, and there was no going back. They had been weak, unsure, and now they were trying to salvage what little dignity they had left. But it was too late. Understand, Alden repeated, his voice low and cold. You think you can understand us. You think you can study us from afar and then decide when the time is right to approach us as if we're some primitive species, waiting for your guidance. The Zoran envoy flinched, but he pressed on, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. This was never meant to be a confrontation. We thought we could work together, learn from each other. Alden leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The Dreadnought loomed in the background, a silent force waiting to be unleashed. It was as if the ship itself was a living entity, its very presence sending a message the Zorans couldn't ignore. Then why send a ship that looks like it was designed for war? Alden's voice rose, full of frustration and disdain. Why send a ship that doesn't look like it's here to make peace, but to destroy it? The envoy's lips parted in shock, but he had no answer. The truth was simple. The Zorans had made their mistake the moment they sent their first message. They had assumed that Earth was just like every other planet in the galaxy, weak, unprepared, and easily manipulated. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for strength. Captain, the envoy said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Please, we don't want war. We came to establish a relationship, to create a future together. We didn't think you didn't think, Alden interrupted, cutting him off. His voice was harsh now, as if each word carried the weight of history itself. You didn't think that humans would ever have the power to say no. You didn't think that we would be strong enough to stand on our own, without the need for your help, but we've learned a valuable lesson, one you've yet to understand. The envoy's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he said nothing. The silence stretched between them like an invisible wall, and for the first time, the Zoran envoy understood the true meaning of Alden's words. Earth was no longer a planet that needed guidance. Earth was no longer a species that could be ignored. Alden glanced at Lieutenant Ramos, who gave him a nod. Without another word, Alden turned back to the screen. Prepare the Dreadnought for full operational status, Alden ordered. We're ending this before it even begins. He turned and walked toward the central command station, his boots echoing in the cold metal halls of the Dreadnought. He didn't need to look back to know that the Zoran envoy was still there, probably shaking in fear. They had come to Earth with hopes of peaceful cooperation, but now they were facing the harsh reality that humanity was no longer interested in playing by anyone else's rules. The Dreadnought was ready, and Earth was about to show the galaxy that no one could challenge humanity's will. The tension in the command room was unbearable as the words from the Zoran envoy hung in the air. His plea for peace, for understanding, now felt like a distant echo. Captain Alden's mind raced, his thoughts locking onto the reality that humanity was at a crossroads. The Dreadnought had always been humanity's greatest weapon, but now it was more than that. It was a symbol of power, a reminder that Earth no longer had to rely on others for survival. And yet, in the cold, silent space between stars, Alden couldn't shake the unsettling thought that they might have made a mistake. The Dreadnought stood as a colossal monolith in the depths of space, an unyielding presence that seemed to consume the very light around it. Its engines thrummed with power, and its weapon systems hummed softly, as if eager to be unleashed. Alden stared at the massive ship, knowing that this moment would define humanity's future, one way or another. There was no going back now. We've established contact with the Zoran fleet, Lieutenant Ramos said, breaking Alden's chain of thought. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that couldn't be ignored. It through, Alden ordered, his voice steady, though the weight of the decision loomed over him like a storm ready to break. The holographic screen flickered to life, and the face of the Zoran envoy appeared once more. His face, usually composed, now showed signs of strain. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes were wide, as if he had seen something in the Dreadnought that shook him to his core. The fear was evident, though he tried to mask it with a facade of diplomacy. Captain Alden, the envoy, began, his voice shaking but still trying to remain authoritative. You have made a grave mistake. The Dreadnought is not just a ship. It is a declaration of war. We came in peace. We sought only to understand your species. But now, with your actions, you've set the stage for a conflict that will tear apart everything we've built. Alden stood tall, his gaze unwavering. The Dreadnought had made its statement, and there was no room for second guesses. The truth was simple. Humanity had been waiting for a moment like this. A moment when they could stand tall and no longer be at the mercy of the galaxy's established powers. Alden couldn't allow doubt to creep in now. You misunderstand us, Alden responded, his voice calm, almost cold. We didn't come here to conquer. We came here to show the galaxy that Earth is no longer a weak, defenseless planet. We've learned from our past mistakes. We've learned to protect ourselves, and we've learned that peace is something that can only be achieved when we are respected. The envoy's eyes flickered, and for the briefest moment, Alden saw the cracks in his facade. The fear was palpable now, and the envoy struggled to find the right words. You think that this will bring peace? The envoy's voice cracked. You think that terrorizing the galaxy will make them respect you? You are wrong. The galaxy is vast, and there are forces beyond your understanding, beyond your Dreadnought. Alden's expression remained unchanged. Let them come, he said quietly. Let them see what happens when they underestimate Earth. The envoy's face twisted in disbelief, but he didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, it seemed as if time itself had stopped. The Zoran ship remained frozen in place, suspended between fear and uncertainty. And then, with a sudden flare of determination, the envoy spoke again. You will regret this, he warned. We may not be able to stop you now, but we will not forget this. The galaxy will never forget this. You've thrown the first stone, Captain Alden, and the consequences will be dire. The transmission ended abruptly, and Alden exhaled deeply. Feeling the weight of the envoy's words hang in the air, he turned to his crew, his expression steely. There was no time for doubt, no time for second guessing. The galaxy would have to make its choice. Humanity had made its decision, and it was time to move forward. Prepare the ship for deployment, Alden ordered, his voice unwavering. We're not just going to sit here and wait for their response. We will show them that Earth does not back down. The crew sprang into action, their movements precise and determined. Alden watched them for a moment, the realization settling in that this was the beginning of something far greater than any one ship, any one battle. This was the beginning of a new era for humanity, an era where Earth no longer had to bow to anyone, where Earth would no longer be the underdog. Outside the command room, The crew worked swiftly, running through final checks, making sure that the Dreadnought was ready for whatever might come next. The ship was a masterpiece of human unstoppable force forged in the fires of necessity. But as Alden stood there, staring out into the abyss of space, he knew that they were venturing into uncharted territory. There would be no turning back from this. Not after what they had done. Alden's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden flash on the command screen. It was a message, but this time it wasn't from the Zorons, it was from an unknown source. A message encoded in a way that Earth's systems had never encountered before. "Captain, you need to see this," Ramos said, her voice tinged with concern. She gestured to the screen, where an unfamiliar symbol blinked steadily. Alden's heart skipped a beat. He leaned forward, his gaze locked onto the screen. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. The unknown force behind the message had made its intentions clear. Earth's actions had already started to ripple through the galaxy, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences caught up with them. "Get ready," Alden said quietly, his voice tinged with a mix of determination and wariness. "The real challenge is about to begin." The Dreadnought drifted silently in the depths of space, its engines humming steadily as it prepared for what was coming. The immense ship seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its enormous form casting a shadow across the star-streaked void. Captain Alden stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the massive viewports that framed the darkness of space. The message from the unknown source still lingered in his mind, a reminder that their actions had consequences far beyond Earth's borders. The Zoran envoy had left, retreating back into their ship, their words still echoing in Alden's mind. "You will regret this." The warning had been clear, but Alden didn't flinch. He had long since accepted the fact that humanity's rise to power would come with challenges. Earth had spent too long in the shadows, too long watching from the sidelines. Now, they were ready to take their place among the stars. "Captain, we've detected another fleet," Lieutenant Ramos said, breaking the silence. Her voice was tense, alert, as she scanned the data on her screen. Alden turned sharply, his instincts kicking in. Another fleet. It was not the Zorans, but someone else, someone who had received their message, and now saw Earth's power as a threat. The Dreadnought had already made an impact, but the galaxy's response was coming faster than Alden had expected. "Where are they coming from?" Alden asked, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "They're arriving from the Andromeda sector," Ramos replied. Her fingers flew over the controls, bringing up a visual display of the incoming fleet. The ships were massive, nothing like the sleek Zoran vessel. These were warships, built for destruction, not diplomacy. A true test of humanity's resolve was about to begin. "Open a channel," Alden ordered, his mind already working through the possibilities. The Dreadnought was ready for combat. It was built for this, but there was something about this new fleet that felt different. The Zorans had been cautious, perhaps too cautious, but these ships were approaching with purpose. They weren't afraid, they were determined. The holographic screen flickered and then stabilized, revealing the face of a new envoy. This one was different, a tall, imposing figure with piercing eyes and a stern expression. The alien wore an armor-like suit that shimmered in the light, and its presence on the screen was commanding. The message was clear. They were not here to negotiate. "This is the Vanguard Coalition," the envoy said, his voice booming with authority. "We've been monitoring your actions, Captain Alden, and we find your display of force unsettling. You've disrupted the peace that has existed for millennia. Your Dreadnought is an abomination, and your arrogance will not go unchallenged." Alden didn't flinch. He had expected this, expected that others would rise up in defense of the status quo. Peace, as it had existed, was fragile, built on the understanding that the strongest forces would dictate terms. Humanity had broken that agreement. Now the galaxy would have to decide whether to accept Earth's rise or fight against it. "The Dreadnought is not an abomination," Alden replied, his voice calm, but it carried the weight of authority. "It is a statement. We've spent too long waiting for others to decide our fate. The time has come for humanity to stand on its own. We don't seek war, but we won't back down." The Vanguard envoy's eyes narrowed, and his lips curled into a smile that was anything but reassuring. "Then you are mistaken, Captain. War is exactly what you've invited. You've brought this upon yourself, and now you will face the consequences." With that, the transmission was abruptly cut. The cold silence in the room was broken only by the low hum of the ship's systems. Alden's mind raced. The Vanguard Coalition was a powerful force, one of the oldest in the galaxy. Their ships were formidable, and their tactics were legendary. This wasn't just a challenge to humanity, it was a battle for control of the galaxy. Shields up. Alden commanded, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Prepare all weapon systems, we won't be caught off guard. The crew moved, quickly, their training taking over. The Dreadnought was ready, its systems activated, and the massive ship came alive, a beast of destruction that was primed for war. The crew stood in place, each person knowing their role in this moment of history. Alden knew that this wasn't just about defending Earth, it was about asserting humanity's right to exist on its own terms. Outside the viewport, the Vanguard fleet loomed closer. The warships were vast and imposing, their sleek black hulls reflecting the distant stars as they advanced. The Dreadnought was smaller in comparison, but it wasn't about size. It was about power, and humanity had never had more of it. Captain, the Vanguard ships are locking onto us, Lieutenant Ramos called out, her fingers flying over the control panels. They're preparing to fire. Alden's heart raced, but his face remained calm. Hold your fire, he said. Let them make the first move. The Vanguard ships opened fire, their energy blasts streaking toward the Dreadnought like streaks of lightning. But Alden wasn't worried. The Dreadnought had been built to withstand attacks far greater than this. The ship's shields flared to life, absorbing the energy blasts with a brilliant display of light. Now, Alden commanded. In an instant, the Dreadnought's weapons systems activated. Massive energy cannons fired, their blasts rippling through space with devastating force. The Vanguard ships, caught off guard by the sheer power of Earth's technology, scrambled to retaliate, but it was too late. The Dreadnought's weapons tore through their shields, cutting through the fleet like a hot knife through butter. The first Vanguard ship exploded in a burst of fire and debris, the shockwave rippling through the vacuum of space. The rest of the fleet hesitated, momentarily stunned by the power of the Dreadnought. But Alden knew they wouldn't give up easily. This is only the beginning, Alden muttered under his breath. Let them come, we'll show them what humanity is capable of. As the Dreadnought fired again, Alden felt a strange sense of pride swell in his chest. Humanity had made its mark. The galaxy would never forget the day that Earth finally decided to take control of its own destiny. The Dreadnought's engines roared through space as it turned, heavy vibrations of its massive structure coursing through the hull. Outside, the remnants of the Vanguard fleet were scattered in all directions. Some ships were in flames, their twisted metal bodies drifting aimlessly through the void. Others had been reduced to nothing more than debris, broken pieces of technology floating in the cold emptiness of space. Captain Alden stood in the command center, his hands gripping the edge of his console, his mind still processing the chaos of the battle. He had known that the Dreadnought was powerful, but seeing the Vanguard fleet fall apart so quickly had left him with an unsettling feeling. The crew was cheering, celebrating their victory, but Alden couldn't bring himself to join in. There was no time for celebration. The galaxy was watching, and this was only the beginning, Captain, Lieutenant Ramos said, her voice breaking through the silence. We've received a transmission from the Zorans. Alden didn't answer immediately. He had expected more. From the Zorans, their retreat had been swift, but it hadn't been without consequences. The Zorans weren't just another alien race, they were a part of a larger galactic community, one that had been in power for millennia. The Dreadnought's display of force had sent shockwaves through the galaxy, but Alden had no illusions. This victory would not go unchallenged. Patch it through, Alden replied, his voice steady, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing on the horizon. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of the Zoran. This time, however, there was no calm facade. The envoy looked shaken, his face pale as he stared into the camera. There were no greetings, no formalities, just a long silence before he spoke. You've made a terrible mistake, Captain Alden, the envoy said, his voice strained. The Vanguard's defeat is nothing compared to what will come next. The galaxy will unite against you. You've upset the balance, and now you will pay the price. Alden's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He had heard these kinds of threats before. The Zorans were known for their bravado, their ability to manipulate fear to get what they wanted. But Alden wasn't afraid. He had made a promise to his crew and to humanity. There was no turning back now. The Dreadnought is not just a weapon, Alden said, his voice cutting through the tension. It's a message that humanity will no longer bow to the whims of those who think they can control us. You tried to manipulate us with your diplomacy, but we are done with that. If the galaxy wants to unite against us, then let them. We will not back down. The envoy's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but Alden cut him off. You made the first move, Zoran, Alden continued, his voice growing colder. Now, it's our turn. Before the envoy could respond, Alden ordered the transmission cut. He turned to his crew, his expression unreadable. The Zorans had underestimated humanity's resolve. They thought that with the Dreadnought's display of power, they could scare Earth into submission. But they were wrong. The Dreadnought was only the beginning. The ship shook slightly as the weapons systems were powered down, but Alden knew that the battle wasn't over. The Dreadnought had destroyed the Vanguard fleet, but the true challenge was still ahead. The galaxy wasn't going to let Earth rise to power without a fight, and Alden had no intention of backing down. "Captain," Lieutenant Ramos said, breaking the silence once more, "we've detected a massive fleet approaching from the outer rim. It's not the Zorans, it's something else, something we haven't encountered before." Alden's stomach tightened as he turned to face the new threat. The Dreadnought sensors had picked up the fleet's movement before anyone else had. But there was no mistaking the gravity of the situation. This was no longer just a skirmish with the Vanguard. This was the beginning of a galaxy-wide conflict. "Where are they coming from?" Alden asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. "They're coming from the Andromeda cluster," Ramos replied. "They've already entered the edge of our territory. We'll have them in range in a few hours." Alden's mind raced. The Andromeda cluster wasn't a place anyone ventured unless they had something to prove. It was a region known for its ancient civilizations, ones that had been long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. But there were rumors of powerful forces hidden within the cluster, forces that could rival even the Dreadnought. "Get us in position," Alden ordered. "Prepare for battle. This won't be like the last fight. We don't know what we're up against." His crew nodded, moving quickly to execute the command. Alden's eyes flicked back to the viewports, his gaze fixed on the darkness of space. The Dreadnought was humanity's ultimate weapon, but Alden knew that strength alone wouldn't be enough. The galaxy wasn't just going to bend to their will. It would take more than firepower to win this war. It would take everything, humanity. Alden's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden burst of static on the communications panel. His heart skipped a beat as the image of an unfamiliar face appeared on the screen. The alien was humanoid, but its features were distinctly different from anything Alden had seen before. It had a narrow, elongated face with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness of space. Its voice was cold, mechanical, and full of authority. "You've awakened the Ancient Ones, Captain Alden," the alien said, its words sending a chill down Alden's spine. "We are the Assassins, and you will find that we do not take kindly to interference." Alden's mind raced as the gravity of the situation hit him. This was the new threat, an ancient civilization that had been dormant for eons, waiting for the right moment to reassert their control over the galaxy. "The Dreadnought is ready," Alden said, his voice unwavering. "And Earth is ready to stand against you." The Ascendant's cold laugh echoed through the comms, a sound that sent a shiver down Alden's spine. The war for the galaxy was only just beginning, and Alden knew that humanity's future hung in the balance. The Dreadnought had never felt heavier, its massive frame pressing down on Alden's chest as he stood at the helm, staring into the abyss of space. It wasn't just the weight of the ship, or the countless lives depending on its was the realization that humanity had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The Dreadnought was a force of nature, a weapon built for one purpose, to show the galaxy that Earth would not be ignored. But now, standing on the edge of an intergalactic war, Alden wasn't so sure if humanity was ready for the consequences of that choice. Outside the bridge, the void of space stretched endlessly, dotted with distant stars and far-off worlds. But it wasn't the beauty of the cosmos that held his attention. It was the fleet of Ascendant ships, their sleek, ominous silhouettes emerging from the darkness, each one a harbinger of destruction. The Ascendants were an ancient civilization, their existence known only in myth and legend. Once thought to be extinct, they had returned with a vengeance, and now they were ready to show humanity just how outmatched they truly were. The Dreadnought had taken down the Vanguard fleet, but these ships were different, far more advanced and far more deadly. "Captain, the Ascendant fleet is in position," Lieutenant Ramos said, her voice tight with tension. "They're activating their weapons." Alden felt the cold grip of fear run through him. It wasn't the kind of fear that came from uncertainty, it was the kind of fear that came from knowing that Earth was about to face a power far beyond its own. And yet, there was something else in Alden's chest, something stronger than fear. It was defiance. Humanity had fought too long to be seen as nothing more than a footnote in the galaxy's history. Now, they were about to prove that they were more than capable of defending their place in the stars. "Activate the shields," Alden ordered, his voice low but commanding. "Prepare to engage at maximum range." The Dreadnought's systems hummed to life, the energy shields flickering as they activated. It wasn't enough to make Alden feel secure, but it was a start. His fingers gripped the armrests of his command chair as he watched the Ascendant fleet approach, their weapons primed and ready. The galaxy had watched as humanity rose to power, and now they were watching again, waiting to see if Earth would survive this challenge. The first blast came without warning, an energy beam so powerful that it cut through the Dreadnought's shields like a knife through butter. The ship rocked violently, sending Alden and his crew stumbling. He braced himself, his heart pounding in his chest, but the Dreadnought didn't falter. The shields held, though the strain on the ship's systems was evident. "They're not holding back," Lieutenant Ramos said, her voice strained. "We need to counterattack now." Alden nodded, his jaw clenched. The Ascendants had made their move, and there was no more room for negotiation. This wasn't a battle for peace, it was a fight for survival. The crew of the Dreadnought was ready, but Alden knew that their true test had only just begun. Fire at will, Alden commanded. The Dreadnought's massive energy cannons roared to life, sending blasts of searing energy streaking toward the Ascendant ships. The shots were powerful, but the Ascendant ships moved with a precision that human technology couldn't match. Their shields flickered momentarily, but they absorbed the blasts without so much as a dent in their structure. The Dreadnought was powerful, but it wasn't invincible. Alden's stomach tightened as he watched the enemy fleet respond with an even greater show of force. A hail of energy blasts struck the Dreadnought again, shaking the entire ship. The force of the impact rattled every compartment, and alarms blared across the bridge as the hull groaned under the pressure. "Report," Alden barked, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. "Shields holding at 60%. Ramos reported quickly. "Hull integrity is compromised in several sectors. We've taken damage to the engines." Alden's mind raced. The Dreadnought was strong, but the Ascendants were relentless. If they didn't do something soon, the ship might not survive. He turned to his tactical officer, who was working furiously at her station. "Deploy all drones," Alden ordered. "We need to create a diversion." The tactical officer nodded, her fingers flying across the console. The Dreadnought's drone bays opened, releasing hundreds of small, agile ships into the void. They scattered, weaving in and out of the enemy. Fire, drawing the Ascendant's attention away from the Dreadnought. It wasn't enough to defeat them, but it bought Alden and his crew a few precious moments. "Captain, the Ascendants are preparing for a final strike," Ramos said, her voice strained with urgency. "They're charging their main weapon. It's going to hit us with everything they've got." Alden's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The Dreadnought had survived the initial onslaught, but the Ascendant's main weapon was capable of erasing entire fleets in an instant. If they couldn't stop it, Earth's fate would be sealed. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Alden ordered. "All hands, brace for impact." But the Ascendants had anticipated this. As the Dreadnought moved to dodge, the Ascendant ships adjusted their aim. Tracking the Dreadnought with uncanny precision, the beam fired, a blinding surge of energy that shot through the darkness, moving faster than Alden could react. The Dreadnought rocked violently as the beam struck, tearing through the outer layers of the ship's hull. The ship shuddered, its systems flickering, but it didn't break. It couldn't. Not yet. "Damage report," Alden shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "We've lost main power to 2 of the reactors," Ramos said, her voice tight with tension. "But we're still operational, Captain, just barely." Alden's eyes flicked back to the viewports, and for a moment he allowed himself a brief breath of relief. The Dreadnought was battered, its systems barely holding together, but it was still fighting, and as long as it was still fighting, humanity still had a chance. "We're not done yet," Alden said, his voice low but filled with determination. "Engage all remaining systems, we're going to finish this." He turned his gaze to the Ascendant fleet, now closing in for the final assault. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for Earth's future. The Dreadnought would hold its ground, no matter the cost. The final showdown had begun, and Alden would not allow humanity to fall. Not now, not ever.